Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here with you. It's 2023. Happy New Year, my friend.
It is now. It didn't start out that way, but it's much happier now. So thank you, Freedom Call, for pulling me out of the Celtic funk that I was in last week.
Definitely a different album of sorts this week. Going back right into your wheelhouse, almost 25 years ago, as this Stairway to Fairyland album came out in 1999. But before we get there, next week, the long-awaited Best of 2022 episode. I know we've had a lot of interest and curiosity as to our thoughts on last year. We've obviously alluded to some of those thoughts in the previous weeks and whatnot, but I'm looking forward to really kind of clamping down on some of these albums from last year. The good news is, to date, I have not heard anything in 2023 that has blown me away. So the list is wide open. All 50 slots are there for the taking, but we're going to be off and running soon enough because fast and furiously these singles and these albums are being released. Not least of which is the new Sleep Token single, Chokehold. Ironically enough, they released that on Thursday, and then the next day they released a second single, The Summoning. I absolutely adore these guys. They were one of my top albums from a year or two ago. You hate them. I know that this is definitely not your cup of tea, but I
hate is a strong word that I save only for Celtic Frost type situations.
Fair enough. I implore you, give them a listen. Give their new album a listen in 2023, and I think you might be in for a surprise.
Yeah, I just didn't really. I didn't love the album last year, and I think part of the problem was that, and by last year I mean 2021. It just, everybody was like so over the moon about it, and then I just listened to it and I was just kind of like meh. So not that I thought it was bad. I just thought it was kind of sleepy, I guess, which thus the name.
Right, aptly named to say the least. Give it a shot. The single I heard on Thursday was a little bit more accessible, I guess would be the word. I'm going to check out the single from Friday. I have not yet heard it. I quite frankly didn't realize that they've been coming out so fast and furiously, but I expect the album to be very, very good. I think that they are on the precipice of really blowing up. One of our listeners from Australia was saying that they are doing a full tour there this year, and they seem to really be getting around. They were in the U.S. last fall, but they were doing an opening set, and they just didn't come anywhere New York City, despite a long run of shows. So I have to think they'll be back in short order.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I could have sworn I saw their name on a bill not that long ago. Who did they tour with?
I don't recall. It was a band that I'm not into, so I really would just be going to the show for them. And quite frankly, I like them enough that I would probably go see them for half an hour or 40 minutes as an opener. But I wasn't going to go 4 hours out of my way to do it because I just assume that they'll be back as a headliner or direct support in the not so distant future.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, interestingly enough, and a former guest of the podcast and Prog Power alum, Seven Spires, has just announced and released a single for their live album, Live from Prog Power USA 21. And the single was for Ghost of Yesterday, a fantastic song off that album. I didn't realize that they were going to release this show that you and I were both at.
Nor did I. It's a nice surprise. I would have been even more excited had there been a DVD Blu-ray as well, but I think we would have noticed had the thing been actually filmed.
Truth.
But it was a hell of a set. I have to say, like that whole night, I spoke to you about recently just how that all five bands just really impressed me that night. It was a really, really, shout out to Milton for that. That lineup was just fantastic. I had such a good time, and I thought Seven Spires really brought it. And then when Roy Khan came on stage, it was just kind of amazing to me that I waited my whole life as a metal fan to see Roy Khan sing, and it wasn't with Camelot or Conception, but with Seven Spires. So
yeah,
go figure, right?
It's and he was great. I have to be honest, and not only with Spires, but obviously Conception as well. What I felt like during that set, you saw a band that kind of was an opener and slowly gaining steam and popularity blossom before our very eyes into a potential headlining act just at that show. The sound was massive. The crowd was into it. And you just saw this groundswell of support for this band. And I know it's not just at Prague Power, because they've been getting this kind of reception all throughout the country and on their European tours as well. I think they're going to be absolutely huge. I spoke about Sleep Token earlier, obviously a very, very different sound, but I feel like in their own way, Seven Spires is doing that same exact thing in the symphonic power metal, whatever the hell they are, scene.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I feel like they're kind of I think they're picking up where Camelot may have left off when they were, I'm just going to be honest, more interesting.
Right, right.
And we'll talk a bit more about Camelot in this episode, but I just feel like it's, and I'm not even going to say this has anything to do with Tommy joining the band. It's just, I think that the band was starting to kind of lose steam even when Khan was still a part of it. And
I agree.
And I want to point out, this is my taste. Like, I was a big fan of everything Camelot did from Fourth Legacy until Black Halo. Those were like the prime years of Camelot for me. And I just I do enjoy I've enjoyed the 3 albums they've done with Tommy, just not as much. And so that's kind of where I'm at with that. I right now I enjoy Seven Spires' new material a lot more than Camelot's. So that's the reason I bring that up.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And maybe there's a bit of a nostalgia there as well, right? I think it's actually going to come into play momentarily when we talk about Freedom Call, just being when you become a fan of a band and you are accustomed to a certain sound and there's a deviation from that sound, I think that your perception changes. If I would have heard Sonata Arctica's last album 2 years ago, and then I would have gone back and listened to their first album, I would have been like, "What? It sounds like a completely different band." But if you're into what you've heard first, sometimes the change is actually difficult to deal with in many respects.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I honestly, I remember when I first moved to Rochester, I would hang out at my friend Caleb's house, and there would always, he lived with his friend Alex, who was in a band. So there were always musicians just hanging out, and we would just be like bullshitting, and it would be so funny to me because like a lot of them would just be like, yeah, like Pain of Salvation was great when like Remedy Lane came out, and like Road Salt sucks. And it's like, but like the prevailing thought was that like all the bands like peaked already and now they're all terrible. And it's like, well, sometimes bands change. Like, Sonata Arctica is a great example because they're totally different than they were when they first started. But I know people that are completely okay with their current material. I happen to like some of it. There's enough other things to like sate that like fast power metal kind of vibe that Sonata Arctica used to play, that I don't need Sonata Arctica to keep doing it, if that makes sense. Like
it does, and that's why the Remedy Lane material is the best and never touched, because nobody is doing what they did on Remedy Lane. I think there's your difference. There are other bands that have picked up that fast power metal style that Sonata Arctica was doing earlier on. Nobody is doing anything like Remedy Lane, and that's why it is demonstrably better than Road Salt 1 and 2.
I guess what I should say is that like there's enough other prog metal bands making really great albums that like, I don't know, like I don't need Pain of Salvation to go back and make another Remedy Lane or another Perfect Element. Like that was an album of its time, and I don't know. I think that one of the things that I've definitely appreciated in the last few weeks trying to listen to almost everything that came out last year is that there's a lot of stuff out there, and there's something to just quench whatever thirst you have. So to me, it's almost kind of a waste to just lament on bands not being the same as they were in their prime or whatever. And even though I was the one who brought this up in the first place, but like, you know, I don't need Camelot to be, I can just go back and listen to Fourth Legacy and Karma and Epica and Black Halo and be happy. And then I could go listen to Seven Spires if I want to listen to.
And yet you chose Freedom Call's debut from 1999, which some would argue was in fact their heyday. Now, I'm not suggesting that they haven't come out with other good albums since then. The reality is they've come out with a lot of albums, but call it for what it is. We first heard this band in 1999, and you picked the album that we first heard. So, but why don't you talk a little bit about why you chose this album, even if it is a bit of a nostalgia pick?
Like I said last week, it was hard to pick. I definitely wanted to do a Freedom Call album. I feel like it's been kind of an omission so far, and you had mentioned that as well. And you know, a lot of people would probably say Eternity was their best album. I'm a big fan of all four of their first four albums. I think they're all really good. After that, they started to get a little bit more, I guess, experimental and like a little, like they'd have like some weird kind of poppy elements on songs like Mr. Evil. But then there's songs like Black and Sun, which I mentioned to you the other day, I think is one of the best Freedom Call songs ever. And then I thought, Beyond was a really good album. I feel like they've been kind of hit or miss since Circle of Life, which I thought was really good and didn't get a lot of fanfare at the time, but I thought there's a lot of good songs. Go listen to Star Child from Circle of Life. It's arguably one of the best Freedom Call songs of all time. But anyway, there's a ton of really good songs on these first four albums. The song Freedom Call on Crystal Empire is hopefully they play it live when you're on 70,000 Tons, because that song is just a blast live. Metal Invasion and Warriors and Land of Light from Eternity. They have a ton of really great songs. That said, I think much the same way we chose Ecliptica when we wanted to talk about Sonata Arctica, which oddly enough came out the same year as Stairway to Fairyland. There's just something about the first album where you're discovering this band for the first time, and more so, this is at a time where we're in our infancy as metal fans, and so most of the bands that we were listening to had been existing for a while. You know, it's like we were catching up on Halloween and Savatage and Stradivarius and Angra and all these releases, and Freedom Call and Sonata Arctica were two of the first bands that were like brand new at the time, and we could kind of jump in on the ground floor rather than have to backtrack. And so I think that there's definitely a nostalgia for that, of being there right from the beginning. And I want to say, I can't remember if it was you or somebody else online. I'll never forget, the first song I ever heard was Shine On.
Yes.
And I was like, wow, this is really awesome. Like it's awesome to hear music that I like, but from a different band. Because at the time, my knowledge of power metal bands probably could have counted on two hands. And then I remember just buying the album and just loving it. And so I have a more of an affinity and a nostalgia for this album than any of their other ones. And going back and listening to it, it's definitely remained.
I'll say a lot to talk about there. You were talking about their kind of the hit or miss nature of their discography. I tend to agree. Not that albums have no good songs. I think that some of their poor albums have some really good songs. But for my money, and again, this is just me, it was I thought that Stairway to Fairyland was a fantastic album, and I was really, really disappointed by Crystal Empire. To this day, I have not been able to get into that album, and I've played it so many times because I thought it was like a me thing, but for whatever reason, I've had issues getting into that album. I thought that I don't disagree. I think that Eternity gets a lot of love. It is a very good album. But for me, the only album I would put on a pedestal with the debut was, in fact, Beyond. That album hit me like a ton of bricks about 10 years ago when it came out in 2014. I thought that was fantastic. And even the most recent album, which came out in 2019, Metal, it had its moments. I didn't think it was anything to write home about, but they've got these two fantastic albums, and then the rest of the stuff is kind of like hit or miss on the discography. Before we get to Stairway, which obviously will be the bulk of our discussion, I did look at their most recent set list because I was curious to see what kind of material they were playing at their live shows. I will have the pleasure of seeing them in a couple of weeks down on 70,000 Tons. They don't touch this debut album, or at least they haven't been on this new tour. They seem to play a little bit of everything, but they don't play anything from this album. And I wonder why that is, because there's some phenomenal songs that are like quintessential to their career, which is now lasting, almost 25 years.
Yeah, come to think of it, I'm not sure that they played anything from this album when they played at Prague Power the one time that I've seen them either. I'm
pulling up that set list now, and they played "We Are One," which is awesome. They played, but it was only one song off the album.
Yeah, I don't know. It could just be because there's just a glut of albums at this point now that they've been around for a while. There's a lot of material to cover. It's kind of the embarrassment of riches, I guess, that we talk about with bands like not respecting the or fans would feel as if they're not respecting the older material. I don't know. Maybe with the 25-year anniversary approaching, would that be? I guess that'd be next year.
Next year, yeah. Well, they started in '98, but then this album would come out in '99.
Right. So maybe I don't know. Maybe they'll play this album or more songs from this album next year to celebrate 25 years. Always seems to be kind of like a gold watch anniversary for bands to like kind of revisit albums and what have you. So
yeah, just an interesting anecdote. I was surprised when they didn't have anything from it in their set. But let's get into it. This album comes out May 31st of '99, and you pointed it out, and you're absolutely right. I remember finding Shine On, or I guess it was an MP3 at the time, which probably took me about 14 years to download. But what kind of drew me to the band was that they had something in common with Gamma Ray. So right off the bat, I was curious as to like what this band was. And that was Dan Zimmerman, Gamma Ray's drummer at the time, who was the drummer for this band. So, back in 1998, 1999, it's not like today where there's 50 albums that come out each week that you're kind of curious to check out or that people are recommending. Back then, when there was an album that was released, you paid attention to it because there were not that many albums that came out on a regular basis. So when you saw that Dan Zimmerman was going to play on an album and you were a big Gamma Ray fan, it was a no-brainer. And then you heard Shine On, you're like, yeah, this is right up right up your alley if you were a Gamma Ray fan at the time.
Right. It wasn't even so much that it was Dan Zimmerman, it was that drummer from Gamma Ray does a side project. It was almost like Kai Hansen's in a band called Iron Savior. I should check them out. And it's like your fandom is causing you to kind of reach out and find out what else you could be listening to, because you don't really, the internet's in its infancy. There's not nearly as much out there. You don't have like iTunes at your disposal where like you have to go and buy a physical album. It's crazy to think about. So like you said, the amount of things just coming across your desk, so to speak, is so minimal at the time compared to now that you would it's an instant excitement factor. I wish trying to remember where I bought this album. If I ordered it online or if I bought it in a store. It might have been at Tower Records. I can't remember, but I just remember I was really excited to get it, and I'm excited to talk about it track by track because I'm curious of your thoughts on the content of this album mirror mine? Because I have opinions. I know that's surprising to you, but I have opinions.
This was a unique experience. I will open with my thoughts generally in a second. I just want to round out the lineup for a second. You had the real introduction to Chris Bay, the vocalist and guitar player, keyboard player extraordinaire. And when I say introduction, I had never heard of his prior band Moondock, which had released 2 albums in 1995 and 1996. As an aside, I became so infatuated with Chris Bay's vocals on this album that I went back and I went on eBay and I bought a Moondock album, and it was their second album called Get Mooned. It was god awful. I mean, absolutely almost unlistenable. And Chris Bay, props to him, he couldn't save this thing. Like this, it was an abomination of an album. We should cover that one of these days just for pure comedic value. I thought it was terrible. I listened to it a few times and I said to myself, thank God I bought this thing used for like $5 because it was just absolutely god awful. But
you overpaid.
I think I did. I probably could have gotten that and Monotheist lumped together, and I think I would have overpaid for the $5. But the problem was I love this guy's vocals so much that I just had to hear more. And after that Moondock experience, I wasn't going to go out and find their debut. It wasn't in the cards. And he had apparently done an EP with a German band called Lanzer, came out in 1992. But like this guy was a virtual unknown. And here he is on this Freedom Call album. Ilker Ersin, bassist and also backing vocals, and then a guitar player who I had never heard of before, a guy by the name of Sasha Gerstner. I think you might be familiar with him now, but at the time, it was a relatively new guitar player who nobody had ever heard of before. For those,
what did that guy ever do?
Yeah, I guess he would. I mean, he would fade into obscurity, except that on his left he would have Michael Weikath, and on his right would be Kai Hansen, as he would become Halloween's longtime guitar player. He's been in the band longer than virtually any other guitar player other than Weikath.
So, and supposedly he had claimed after he left Freedom Call that he would never play in a metal band again, and then a year later he was in Halloween. So
and they can't get rid of him. But it's really, really funny. But that's your lineup here, and it's going back to what you were saying. This experience for me was really, really interesting. I loved this album when it came out, and I used to play it constantly, and I have very, very vivid memories of about 80% of this album. There were 1 or 2 songs that I completely forgot about. But the reason I bring this up, the songs that I used to love as a kid, not my favorite songs now. And the songs that I fell in love with this week were songs that I enjoyed, but I didn't pay much mind to back in the day. So my thoughts on this album, generally, I think it's still a very, very good album, and I enjoyed it immensely. But what I enjoyed about it has completely changed over the last 25 years. And I have not listened to this band ever since they were announced for Prog Power. I haven't listened to them because I was depressed that I wasn't seeing them. So I actually just kind of like stopped listening for a bit, other than the new album, which came out in 2019. I just kind of put them on pause for a little bit. But it was good to go back and visit. It's just a completely different experience. I have a feeling that well, I shouldn't say that. I am also curious as to whether the songs that I now enjoy the most are the same as yours.
I am too. Although, to be honest with you, like my feelings about the songs in this album have remained pretty much the same. I was hoping that maybe there would be some change, and it's kind of pretty much stayed on par with how I've always felt about the album. Just that I still enjoy the songs that I enjoy, and still there's still some songs that just don't hit for me, and never have, and still don't. Interesting.
Well, this is going to be even more interesting than I thought. When I first heard it as a kid, without a discerning ear, I always said to myself, "Well, they're just kind of happier Gamma Ray clones." But I actually don't think that that's the case. They add elements to this album, and I think it starts off with Over the Rainbow. They add elements here that Gamma Ray just, quite frankly, never employed. mostly because they're so keyboard driven with like the church organs and the church bells. And those sounds kind of permeate this entire album, which is really, really interesting because it was kind of a unique sound to add to what's otherwise kind of a generic power metal band in many ways. I don't think the guitars here, no disrespect to Sasha, is what the standout features of this album are. I think that I think it's competent playing. I just don't think it's anything to write home about. I think the riff on this particular track, not blazing fast, but it has that upbeat sound, but they're kind of mundane. But it's Chris Bay's vocals on this track and on the rest of the album that really shine, almost as if it was a solo album. What are your thoughts on Over the Rainbow? Because the other thing I would just say is the backing vocals here take me out of it a little bit. And I loved the song as a kid. I don't love it as much as I used to, although I think it's a good song.
I love the song. I think it's such a great way to kind of kick things off. That, like you said, like the kind of like bells and organs and stuff. I feel like this band missed its mark. It could have made a Christmas album.
I totally agree.
But I really like this song as an intro, just to kind of kick things off. It really gives you a vibe of what the band is all about and kind of what you're getting into with, you get like some of those like kind of like deeper backing vocals, almost kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to say growly, but they're almost like kind of like, stern, I guess. Like, yeah. I don't know how else to describe it, but, I think the chorus is super catchy. Like I agree with you about like this isn't blowing you away with like guitar solos or anything like that, but it's really the melodic nature of all the songs. The melodies are really what carries the songs on this album. And I think I think this song is a really great way to kind of kick things off. As soon as I played it for the first time this week and this song kicked in, I'm like, yes, this is what I need in my life right now. Like that's some just upbeat and catchy and happy like music. And it really just sets the tone for the whole album and really their whole career when you think about it.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very representative track. I definitely enjoy it. It kind of hits me in that warm nostalgia spot because of the time frame that it came out and everything else. I just think that there's better material on the album, which we'll get to. The second track, Tears Falling, is interesting because it actually starts off with this drum intro, which reminds me of something that would have been on Somewhere Out in Space, which I guess is what obviously Zimmerman was kind of just coming off the heels of at the time. So it makes sense. But what's interesting is the pacing on this song is kind of very similar to Over the Rainbow. It's not like it's lightning fast, but it's definitely more upbeat power metal. And again, I think that what's interesting is on the first track, I don't love the verses, although I agree with you. The chorus is excellent. I think that the verses on Tears Fallen is actually better. And so when you marry that with what's otherwise another catchy melodic chorus, you actually have a better tune. And while I used to say gamma ray clones through and through, I actually hear a bit of Angra on this track and at other points on this disc. So to me, it's like the perfect blend of if Gamma Ray and Angra had a baby, you'd have Freedom Call. Just not as fast as Angra and slightly more melodic than Gamma Ray.
That would be a hell of a baby.
You're the godfather. Congratulations.
Oh my God. What a proud moment. I just think this is another really good tune. I'll kind of let the cat out of the bag here. I feel like this album starts out like on fire, and then it completely tails off. And I'll point out where I find that it tails off. But right now, I think we're still running on all cylinders. This is another song where it's just happy. Like it just makes me happy. Like I just listen to it and it should be no surprise that I would go on to love bands like Power Quest and Rainseed. This was kind of like
planting the seeds in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Like just kind of like it was, I always loved power metal, but I would always have a little bit more of special place in my heart for when it was a little bit happier or flowery, I guess would be a way of putting it. And this Freedom Call almost was kind of like the godfathers of flower power metal.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Let me ask you this. What were your thoughts on the instrumental section of this song? Did it take you out of it a bit? Because for me, it just kind of like almost like comes to a halt and then it picks up again. But it's just like, I don't know. It was just a weird instrumental section to me that almost takes me out just a touch.
No, it is what it is. It's just like, it's a power metal song. There's got to be parts where the singing stops and there's just going to be, it actually, in a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of what Gamma Ray would do on certain songs where things would almost just kind of slow down and you'd get like kind of almost like this kind of pensive or contemplative kind of part. And then it would start to build up again. And then here come the guitars and here come everything else. And then it builds and builds and builds. And then guitar solo and then soaring vocals come back in to close out the proceedings. So I think it works. I never really paid any mind to it as far as like taking me out of the song. It just felt like another part of the song so that the whole song didn't sound completely repetitive all the way through.
All right. I think I can understand that. Talk to me for a second about Fairyland, which is the third track here. I'm assuming this is not where it kind of goes off the rails for you.
No, definitely not. Really, to me, like an epic build at the beginning. Just really kind of just you have like I think I never really appreciated the drumming on this album as much as I did going back and listening to it again, especially in a song like this, because the drums are really what leads this song kind of in. And it starts out kind of with that kind of mid-tempo vibe, but then like it has these like awesome orchestrations that kind of lead it in. It's just such an epic lead in that goes for almost 2 minutes to like kind of really get the ball rolling on the verses and stuff. It's not as fast as the first two songs, but I also think that like it's good. You need a little bit of a change of pace and a change of tempo. And this is another song I just really like. And it goes to show you that like, this band's not just about fast, happy bangers. They also can do some really good kind of middle tempo type songs without being boring.
It's not a ballad, but I think that the change of pace was necessary because the first two tracks are kind of the same tempo. This was a track that when I was a kid, I used to enjoy, but I gravitated towards the faster stuff. But I guess in my old age, I listened to this and I was blown away, absolutely blown away by this track this week. This and one other one were two tracks that just rose head and shoulders above the rest. And to be honest with you, it's not just the pacing, but it's that epic quality that you mentioned with the keyboards. I cannot imagine this band without those keyboard sounds. It would sound so pedestrian and so basic. But then when you add that element, it just takes it off the charts. And what I also liked here is that this is Chris Bay's first real demonstration of his vocal prowess, where it's not just him kind of hitting those ridiculous high notes, but where he kind of goes down an octave or two and you can kind of hear him and appreciate his voice and the full range of his talent. I loved it. And I got to be honest with you, I'm actually going to make it my song of the week because I couldn't believe how it hit me. My one negative is something that must be pointed out, but let's take a listen and I'll get to that in a second.
Climb the stairway, we reach the rain. Our horizons, Holy One.
that song just puts you in a good mood. My only gripe, and I alluded to it before we listened, my only gripe is that the lyrics are a bit hard to swallow. And I say that because if you're looking for like introspective, thought-provoking, philosophical lyrics, probably not the band for you. But I don't even fault them because this is what most power metal is. But by and large, this track is absolutely awesome. And then it leads into the track that we both, used as our introduction to the band, Shine On. I'm curious if Shine On holds up for you as well as it did back in the day, because this again was our first exposure to the band, and really anyone's first exposure to the band back in 1999.
Yeah, I still like it a lot. I think that because for 25 years I just know the song so well, but kind of looking back on it with a more critical ear, it's funny listening to it and thinking to yourself, like, if you didn't know any better, you would think that a ballad was about to start. Like,
yes.
It starts out with like a very power metal-y kind of guitar solo, but then it slows down and it sounds like it's going to be a power ballad. And then all of a sudden it just kicks in, freedom for us all. And then all of a sudden, like, everybody just starts to just kick in, and this song just blows up into this fast-paced banger.
Yeah, it goes from power ballad to like freight train in like right away.
Yeah, I think this song still, it hits me right in the feels, and it just makes me think of back when I only knew one Freedom Call song, and this was it. It does have, like you mentioned with Tears Falling, it has like a part where it just kind of like, the song kind of just stops almost. And then there's like this like kind of gruff vocals, like, I kind of liken it to like Wyke's vocals that just aren't that great. I don't think it's Chris Bay because it just sounds like totally different. It's really weird. But then again, like, it slows down, then it picks back up again. This was just, what a great, I don't know. It just, I think I'm just clouded by nostalgia because this song I have such fond memories of listening to. It's probably like one of the first like metal MP3s I had on my computer, like before I actually had the album. And then I probably just deleted the track once I bought the CD. I remember I had a rule that I would only keep music on my computer if I didn't own the actual physical version of it.
Has that come full circle?
Yeah, that way, like, I can conserve space, because if I had, every song I knew on my computer, like, I would have run out of space real quick. So it was only for like songs that I just didn't have in any other capacity. And I would stick to that rule for years until iTunes became a thing. And then I blame our friend Ryan for showing me his iMac or his MacBook with his iTunes and all of his albums meticulously organized. And like, the second I went back to college, I downloaded iTunes for Windows, which ran like sheer garbage in 2002 or whatever. It was so slow. And I just went and ripped every CD I owned and just created this. And that's how it all kind of started for me, this massive digital collection. So anyway, a little bit of a sidetrack there. But yeah, this track kind of goes back to those days of like, you would have one track from a band, like when Power Quest, when I would have Far Away and Temple of Fire, literally the two tracks from Power Quest on my computer until I would actually go and get the albums. And this was more of the same. But yeah, how about you? Like, where does this song kind of land for you after all these years?
It holds up very well. And I think that it's very reminiscent of the era. I feel like this song encapsulates late 90s power metal, and it's a sound that, like, for whatever reason, you don't really hear so much in power metal today. You never hear a power metal song and say, yeah, it reminds me of Freedom Call from 99. Like, for some reason, it's just like this era kind of just stood on its own. And the one thing I'll say is, as much as I remember the song, because I played it so much, for whatever reason, it was a little longer than I remember. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. It's just the song was like denser and longer than I remember. And I guess it's maybe because the chorus is so epic that's what I just really hung on to for all these years, but it was cool to go back and listen to it. And I think it definitely is one of the top 5 songs on the album. Like, I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but I would put it in the top half of songs that I like on the album. Great stuff. And I can understand why they selected it as a single, especially because it has that big ballad feel at the very beginning. And then it transitions into the one song that you met, like we were able to say, that you saw live at Prague Power. And ironically, in my notes, I have the fact that if I was going to listen to one song from this album live, it might be We Are One, which is kind of ironic. Very, very good guitar work on this song. I know that I was a little critical earlier, but this song, the guitars are fantastic. It's very catchy, and it has almost a medieval feel to it, just in terms of the way it's presented. I think I actually prefer the middle of this disc. Track 3 was my song of the week. Track 4 was a fantastic single. We Are One is this really catchy, fast song, and a perfect example of why power metal was better 25 years ago. And then one or two more songs that are also just, with the exception of, well, we'll get there, but like this middle tier of the album is really, really good for me. And there's few bands that are doing it like this. The only one that kind of comes to mind is that band Thorough Rod, who nobody talks about, but like they had a really good album that came about 3 or 4 years ago.
Yes, that's a good callback there. So this is like you said, the one song they played at Prague Power from this album. It also appears on their Ages of Light compilation album that came out in 2013. It's one of 2 songs from this album that are represented. Tears Falling being the other one. So I thought that was interesting that those were the 2 choices from this album. They also feel like they would be the best live representations from this album, like you mentioned. This song came across really, really well live, I will say. And kind of looking at this 18-track list of songs on this this compilation album, man, this band has a lot of albums and really good songs. Like, if you take it's kind of like, do you remember when we talked about Hardcore Superstar and you kind of created your like essential Hardcore Superstar playlist?
Yep.
I feel like this is another band where if you took like the essential Freedom Call songs and made a 2-disc compilation, it would really be out of this world. I think that their best material really holds up with any of the best power metal bands over the years.
It sounds like you've just given yourself a homework assignment, my friend. I look forward to
probably already have a playlist of my favorite Freedom Call songs. It might be missing stuff from more recent albums, but it wouldn't be that hard, honestly.
I believe it. I talked about the middle section of this album. A notch lower than some of the tracks that preceded it would be Hymn to the Brave, which, very aptly named, it sounds like this power metal church hymn that you would hear like before a battle or something like that. The issue for me is that it's just a little bit repetitive. I thought that the instrumental section here was actually the highlight, and it reminds me of something that Roland Grappo would write on guitar with that slightly neoclassical feel to it, which was a real highlight. I actually thought that was one of the best instrumental sections on the entire album. I have a feeling you don't like this track, and I don't know why. And it's not because I'm reading your face. For some reason, I feel like this is not your favorite track on the album. Tell me why that is.
You're wrong.
Really? Okay. I put myself out there.
Nice try. No, I really like this song. I agree. It is a little bit repetitive, but it's so epic. Like, just like you mentioned, their use of like these kind of church-like organ sounds and like the bells and everything. You're right. This band is a totally different band without it. Like those keyboard orchestrations and everything, they carry the melodies and everything, and it really adds this element to the band that like you don't get from a Halloween or a Gamma Ray at the time, because it's maybe a song here and there, but this is Freedom Call's kind of signature sound that kind of permeates through the entire album and pretty much, their first several albums. I really like this song. It's probably the closest thing to a ballad, I guess, on the album. But I think it's just really, to me, it's like a tankard of ale, swing your arm back and forth at the, it's like, I don't know. It's kind of like the celebration of a battle's won or whatever. I don't know. I really like this song. It's epic, and I think it's well placed because the album, for the most part, has been pretty fast paced throughout, and so this kind of slows things down a little bit, and then it follows up by, I would argue, the most epic song on the album, Tears of Tarragon, not to be confused with the McCormick Spice. This is Tarragon with one R. But it kind of, I think that these two songs kind of slow things down a little bit in a good way. Like, it's, again, like I said before, the band shows that they really have chops, not just with the speedy stuff, but with other, tempos as well.
I love Tears of Tarragon, and it's funny because if I hadn't selected Fairyland, this would have been my other song of the week. So what I found myself gravitating towards was those slower, mid-paced, anthemic songs, as opposed to what I remember the band for, which is speedy power metal and fast flower power metal. So like my thoughts have just changed completely on this album. And what I love is that at around the 4-minute mark, the song really just kind of picks up, which is something that, like, out of nowhere, it just goes from this really cool, almost crowd. You can almost hear like this being a crowd favorite at a live show back in 2000. And then at the 4-minute mark, it just takes off with this really, you kind of have this epic instrumental section. You're just waiting for that final chorus to be the big payoff, and it comes shortly thereafter. I think it's probably Chris Bay's best vocal performance on the album, and very emotional despite the lyrics. Just a very emotional song. A real winner for me, and something that I probably didn't appreciate enough 25 years ago.
So, song of the week for me. And I'll tell you a little interesting story that involves you. This is one of those songs that, like you mentioned before, like that you might not have paid as much attention to back in the day. And
Sure.
Same for me. And then going back and listening to it, I was like, holy shit. The song is great. Going back to 2019, we've alluded to these playlists that you make every month. And, this is something that I asked you to do, back when I was starting to get back into metal again. And I thought it would be a good way to, to kind of get more stuff that I might not have known about under my, into my wheelhouse, so to speak. But anyway, you had made a playlist in April of 2019, and this song was on it, and it, maybe just hearing it detached from the rest of the album made it stand out more for me, but I couldn't believe how awesome it was. A song that I'd heard a million times just hit me like in a different way. And I would end up the following year making this playlist, and it's become a thing that I do every now and again, where I make a playlist of all old songs that never made it onto any other playlist for whatever reason. It's kind of like the like lost hits or whatever in my mind. And this was, I think, is the first playlist I ever made like this. And so I put Tears of Tarragon on there, has Eye to Eye by Fate's Warning, Evil Warning by Angra, Under a Glass Moon by Dream Theater, We Hold the Key by Stradivarius. Just songs that, like, when I was making these mixtapes back in the day, they weren't the obvious choices because, because Images and Words had Take the Time and Pull Me Under, or Fourth Dimension had Distant Skies and Twilight Symphony. So this is kind of like my make good for missing stuff. And this, I love this playlist. I have to share it with you. The Edge of Madness from The Edge is on there.
Nice.
Mission Profile by Threshold. Just a lot of good stuff. This is one of my favorite playlists. And this song is part of the reason why, but, anyway,
you hadn't played out these songs yet. So it was like the second crop of great stuff that you just hadn't played 10,000 times, maybe just 1,000.
Right, and then I would go on to listen to the playlist 10,000 times to make up for it. So,
Exactly.
and every year, and so I keep like a playlist entry, and whenever a song like this comes across, instead of putting it on I try to keep my new playlist focused on newer stuff. But if something older comes, I'll throw it in this folder, and then once I have enough to build a whole playlist, I will drop it, and it'll be like a throwback playlist. And I have one that I'm currently been working on for a few months now, and a lot of songs typically come up from doing the podcast. I think I threw on a song from Power Slave, and just some of the albums that we've done where there's just songs that I kind of missed out on. Typically, they're songs that I would end up making Song of the Week, and I'll be like, oh, that should be on a playlist. So I throw it in there, and you'll see the playlist eventually. I'll drop it once it's finished. But
Awesome.
That's just a little insight into what goes on in my my head. But let's give it a listen. This is Tears of Tarragon by Freedom Call.
Let's dance in the air on a winter morning. Hear that color wild. There's wind in the hair, blowing dreams. I'm longing to see the world playing itself. All my deeds I will repent. All my faith will never end.
An absolute fantastic choice. As I said, probably the other song of the week for me as well. So I'm happy that I get to listen to it twice this week. But I have a little bit of a trivia question. One, were you aware that they came out with a Tarragon EP later in 1999, and they came out with a special version of this song? Do you have any idea about this? Because this is like really getting into the weeds.
Yeah, well, I remember. I never bought it. I downloaded it when I was in college, and I've had it ever since because it was the only thing other than this album that Freedom Call had before Crystal Empire was released. And there was a bunch of tracks that were not on this album, including the first of many covers I would hear of Dancing with Tears in My Eyes, which I believe Avantasia would go on to cover as well. A song I'd never heard before. In fact, I'm not even too sure who the original artist is, but I love Freedom Call's version of it. It's a really good tune. But there's also some new tracks, Warriors of Light, Heart of the Brave, Kingdom Come, which I believe is a bonus track on some versions of Stairway to Fairyland. But the thing that blew me away, I just found this out today, is that so there's an extended version of Tears of Tarragon, which is narrated as a story. Never knew who narrated it. Biff Byford from Saxon is the narrator.
And that was the reason for my question, because I was going to ask you if you knew who narrated this version.
I literally found that out today. Like that is new information.
Shout out to Biff from Saxon. I never knew that. But
also, one of my favorite names in heavy metal, Biff Byford. Like
you've always been a fan of alliteration. This should be no different. So cheers to Biff. Now let's talk about where this album takes a little bit of a dip.
Yep, this is it. This is for me where the drop off is. The album is like to me it's really just 8s, 9s, and 10s all the way up until this point. And then just Graceland and Holy Night are two songs that just never really did anything for me. And I was hoping that years later I'd go back and listen again. And Graceland's, like, they're not bad songs. Like, don't get me wrong. It's just kind of boring. Like, there's not really much to it. And Holy Night has a little bit more, like, pep to it. Graceland's a little bit more of a mid-tempo. It's a little bit droning. Maybe not the right word, but it's just
After
a little
Celtic Frost, you got to be really careful when you use the word.
You can't be
droning.
throwing their own droning around.
I mean, we don't use that term lightly here at the Metal Exchange.
Yeah,
no,
that's all right. I'm going to strike that from the record. It's just a little plotting. Maybe is about it. Let's go with plotting.
I like it.
Yeah, and Holy Night has a little bit more pickup to it. It's a little bit more classic power metal, but there's nothing about it that's really excites me very much. Like it's the choruses and verses are just average to me. I feel like maybe these songs could have been spaced out earlier in the album, because I feel like the album kind of ends in a little bit more disappointing because of how strong the first bunch of tracks were, and then you just it kind of falls off a cliff with these two. I think Another Day, the last song, is the best of the last three songs, but even still, it's not. I don't think any of these three songs compare to any of the songs that preceded them.
I will disagree with Another Day for a second, but let me leave that off. I just want to make a couple of notes. Graceland has a really offbeat intro that almost sounds, you're going to think I'm crazy, but it's almost like a power metal version of Hocus Pocus by Focus. There's something quirky about that start, which is just really weird, but the song is not that good. It's fine. It's just not a standout tune by any means, and I think it pales in comparison to everything that came before it. Holy Night is an outlier for a completely different reason. To me, it's like if you infused 70s hard rock with power metal, that would be Holy Night. It reminds me more of like Rainbow and Deep Purple than it does Gamma Ray, if that makes sense.
The guitar intro is completely misplaced on this album, in my opinion. It doesn't feel like it belongs.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I just, for some reason, it doesn't grab me. The one thing I will say is that towards the end of the song, it kind of has, the orchestration makes it feel almost like Rhapsody in a way, which is kind of cool. But between that and the vocal rounds, which is almost like a Sabotage thing, it's just a misplaced song. And I almost wonder if it would be better as like a B-side or something like that, because it's cool, but it's not, it's just something off-putting about it. But where I really disagree, though, is Another Day. Another Day is actually, in my opinion, one of the top 3 songs or top 4 songs on the album. I think that it's some of the best guitar work on the album, and these epic drum fills that you hear throughout are absolutely awesome. It's pretty fast. The mix is great, and I never paid it any attention back in the day, but I like it a lot. And I think it ends the album in this uplifting kind of way, which is kind of needed after Holy Night, which is, again, a little off-putting in certain ways. I think it's a good way to end the album, and I think that it's better than you give it credit for. Not saying that it's the best track on the album, but it's very good.
I'll say this. The first, let's see, the first 7 songs in this album I think are really awesome songs, and I think the fact that this song doesn't live up to the first 7 songs to me is not a knock at all. It's just, I think Graceland and Holy Night are the 2 songs I just don't love. This song is quite good. I think it's probably the best choice to be the last song. It's just that it sucks that like those 2 songs had to precede it, because it just kind of like gives kind of a listless, I don't know, way to kind of end things out, even though it is a good song. I don't know. I don't necessarily disagree with you. It's just, I just love those first 7 songs so much. And then like, I think it was just a poorly ordered album. I mean, in all honesty, I feel like they probably could have just gotten away with knocking those 2 songs off, making it an 8-track album. It would have been a little short, but, I think it would have felt more consistent, cohesive. And I probably would have given it a higher ranking had those 2 songs not been present. Well,
sometimes less is more. What are you ranking this album on a scale of 0 to 10?
I'm going to give it an 8.25. I still think that No, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm gonna give it an 8.5. It's just that the songs that I really like really just carry this album. I think it probably would be in the nines if there weren't two songs that just don't live up to the standards of the other 8. I guess I'll put it. You know what? 8.375. I'm wavering, so I'll just go in between the two. Let's do that.
I can see the internal struggle that you're
yeah.
having
Sometimes
right
it's
now.
hard. Sometimes it's hard. But yeah, that's my final answer is 8.375. That's what fractions are for.
I am not having that struggle. This album is clearly an 8 to me, and the reason I say clearly is a 7 lumps it in with some just more stuff that's closer to average, and this is a better than average album, and it's a great debut, but it does not go anywhere near the 9s that are reserved for your best of the genre type of albums. I like this one a lot. I think that Freedom Call is a band that, again, I think that if you put their best material together, it's definitely in the 9s. The filler brings it down a bit, but this album is a solid 8 for me. It's a very good listen, and for those that haven't heard it or are just familiar with the band's more recent material, definitely go back, check this out. I think there's a lot to sink your teeth into.
I'm with you. I'm gonna just reiterate that I think that this could have been closer to one of the all-time greats had it been consistent from start to finish with like really good songs, but I think this was a really great way for this band to kind of kick things off, and they would end up having a very great career. They still are around, as we mentioned. They've made a ton of albums. Like you mentioned, there's a slew of really, really great songs, and I think they've just become one of the real classic power metal bands, especially German power metal. I think that they kind of just trail pretty much Halloween and Gamma Ray, which is, pretty good company.
Blind Guardian.
Yeah, well, they're pretty good too.
Blind Guardian. But no, aside from that, I'll say this. I'll kind of put a bow on it by saying only one original member, Chris Bay, the only member of the band that is still around from the debut. They've had many lineup changes over the years. I'm not going to get into all of them, but it's just interesting how the one constant has been his vocal presence.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned earlier that like it felt like a solo project, and it's kind of what Freedom Call has become. Although, I mean, Lars Retkowitz has been in the band for quite some time now. He joined the band in 2005. I believe he was, maybe not. He joined the band 4 years after Sasha left. So there must have been somebody.
Cedric Dupont was on guitars for a spell for about 4 years, I think.
Yeah, there you go. He also from Simforce. And so he's been kind of the pretty much the long-term guitar player. Chris Bay also plays guitars for this band because they're only a three-man band right now. I think their drummer is kind of a drummer for hire type guy. I feel like every time I see a live video of this band, there's somebody else drumming. I know when they played at Prague Power, Rami Ali was their drummer, and I think he pops up on a bunch of different things I've seen over the times. I forgot what band he's in nowadays. I'll actually look it up. But I was mentioning to you that I found it interesting that when I was looking at the names of everybody that was on this album, it dawned on me that I had met every person on this album at one point or another. And Rami Ali is now the drummer for Sirius Black. So that's where I remember him from. But yeah, so, I met Chris Bay and Ilker Ersin at Prague Power when the band played, a few years back. I met Sasha Gerstner outside of BB King's in New York City before a Halloween show, which I think was the first time I had seen him perform live with the band. It was probably the Rabbit Don't Come Easy tour, come to think of it. And I met Dan Zimmerman at Prague Power 3 with the rest of Gamma Ray, much to the chagrin of Snowdy, who couldn't get that box autographed. It's one of these days I'm gonna, if I ever get any prominence in this world, I'm gonna make sure I get Dan Zimmerman to get that signature onto that box, because Mike, I know Snowdy needs that signature to complete the set. Interesting though. It's funny over the years, just kind of meeting people, and especially through Prague Power, and I was just like, holy crap! I've actually had a conversation with every single person that was on this album, so I thought that was kind of neat. But yeah, this was a really fun kind of divergence from last week's material, and I don't know if Brian mentioned Freedom Call because he had heard the podcast, or just had the same kind of thought that this would be well in the opposite direction. But if so, cheers. That's an amazing
go out and play Powerball, because you hit the nail on the head. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It kind of puts a nice bow on the year. We'll do our best of next week. I just want to share a couple of news items. We talked about Camelot earlier. They put up a teaser for their new album, which I believe is coming out later this year. I'll be listening. I don't know if it's going to grab me like some of the earlier stuff, but their newer material has been good. I just don't know that I would say it's among my favorite albums each year. But new Camelot, my ears perk up.
I will say, I'm excited to see them at Prague Power. They're going to be headlining for no other reason that I haven't seen them live in a really long time. And I'm sure once I see them live, I'll be good for another 10 years or so. Because there was, I think, a time in my life where I was just getting like overkill on Camelot. I saw them live so many times, and never with Khan, oddly enough. It was like I saw them with Fabio. I saw them a whole bunch of times with Tommy. They opened for Nightwish at Prague Power 2 nights in a row. Like, I just went through this like overkill phase with Camelot, and now it's been so long since I've seen them that, like, you know, I think my expectations are tempered, where I'm not going to be like disappointed when they don't play anything from Fourth Legacy, because I am expecting that to be the case. I'm hoping that maybe because it's Prague Power, they do a little fan service and dig a little deeper into the catalog. But I think going into it with lessened expectations will make it more enjoyable.
Yeah, I agree. The irony, and I never thought I would say these words, but depending on when they're playing on 70,000 Tons, I may skip them for other bands if there's something that I want to see more. You know, I don't know who it is necessarily, but it's always interesting because you're kind of running around from stage to stage watching different bands play, and something often has to give. Camelot may be one of those bands, because I know that I will have the pleasure of seeing them in Atlanta. So we'll see what happens. But nonetheless, new Camelot album for next year. And just one tour that I wanted to announce. Vicious Rumors will embark on a U.S. tour kicking off March 8th in Reno, Nevada, ending in April 1st to be exact, in Tulsa. They are coming to New York on March 19th. This is a band that I have a guilty pleasure for. They have one particular album, Welcome to the Ball, which in many ways is almost like a Savatage clone from the late 80s era Savatage, the gutter ballet era of Savatage. And the reason I say that is because on this tour, they are going to play a lot of their Atlantic era material, which was in fact Welcome to the Ball and the albums that preceded it. So I am curious to hear some of those songs live. I may kind of cheat a little bit, see what the set list is for them when they kick off the tour, and then go catch them in Brooklyn a couple of weeks later. And I don't know that you're familiar with these guys, we're going to do Welcome to the Ball one of these days, because I have some stories about that album which are pretty interesting, and I think you'll really enjoy it. I think it's one of those albums where, like, you'll hear it and you'll be like, I don't know why I haven't been listening to this for 30 years. Yeah,
I'm not super familiar with a lot of their material. I probably have like a couple of songs here and there. Actually, no, I do have that album, and I'm guessing it was on your recommendation. For
sure.
So yeah, that's definitely something to consider going forward. I do want to mention from the department of boy, I wish this was happening in the United States. Oddly enough, in doing a little prep for this Freedom Call episode, I had noticed that after after Stairway to Fairyland was released, Freedom Call did a tour of France with opening for Angra and Ed Guy. Talk about a show. But anyway, the reason I bring that up is because there's going to be a short little stint this year in Japan. Power Quest is going to Japan with Twilight Force. Boy, if that was coming to the United States, I might have to get in my car and follow that tour around like a deadhead,
playing
like
the same set list every night. But
no, I don't care. It'd be a powerhead. That, and I know how much the Japanese fans love Power Quest and presumably Twilight Force. So I think that's a blast. I know that I also know that the band members are friendly with one another because they played together in Japan. A few years ago, around the same time that Power Quest and Twilight Force played at Prague Power, the bands became friendly, and so I think that's really cool. It seems like Power Quest is really trying to hit all their spots. I think they're also playing one of the festivals in Spain, I believe.
Land of the Rock or something, and
yeah. So they're not going out. They're not going quietly.
No, and now that you reminded me, and I'm not sure what kind of brought this to the forefront. I got one other bit of news, which I thought was absolutely beyond comprehension. Extreme metal band Cradle of Filth, formed at this point over 30 years ago, Danny Filth, the singer, is doing a collaboration on the next Cradle of Filth album with Ed Sheeran. What the hell is that going to sound like? And how did they get him to agree to do this? Like, I'm so curious. You have one of the biggest stars in pop rock radio with an extreme metal band that I've never really listened to, but I know that they're wildly popular. What is that going to sound like? And how did they get him to agree to it? I'm blown away by this.
I always think of Cradle of Filth because when Master Plan played Prague Power, I was one of their sponsors. You were too, and I was backstage meeting the band afterwards, and just kind of BSing with the guys, and Martin Skorupka was the drummer for Master Plan at the time, and I was kind of in my head planting seeds like, hey, you guys, ever been to New York? You should play a show in New York. And Martin goes, I've never played in New York with Master Plan, but my other band, Cradle of Filth, maybe you've heard of them.
So funny.
I'm like, yeah, I've heard of them. I didn't have the heart to tell them that I'd never heard any of their songs, but anyway, and also just interesting, like a friend of mine, Zoe Marie Fedorov, is now a member of Cradle of Filth. She does female vocals and plays keyboards with the band, and I just have been friends with her on Facebook for years, and then all of a sudden she's like, I'm in Cradle of Filth now, so I thought that was kind of cool. So just a couple of reasons. Maybe we should do one of their albums one of these days, because it sounds like neither one of us are well versed in this band at all.
I would agree with that, and quite frankly, let's do the new one, because I want to hear this Ed Sheeran tune. Morbid curiosity is getting the best of me. So if we don't do one of the classic albums, we can certainly do the new one.
Yeah, apparently Ed Sheeran's a fan, and that's why. So
wow, okay,
yeah, because I'm looking, according to Wikipedia, which could have been written by anyone. It says that Cradle of Filth serves as an influence for a variety of bands, and they just list a number of bands that you would expect, like Dimmu Borgir and Ghost and Black Dahlia Murder, and then Ed Sheeran.
Yeah, because when I hear Ed Sheeran, I think of extreme metal.
In fact, Ed Sheeran is right next to Carrick Angren, so there you go.
Well, Carrick Angren I can hear, and having seen them live, I can totally see that. But anyway, I digress.
I never thought I would see those two names next to each other in anything in my life.
And you probably never will again, thanks to Wikipedia. But yeah, look forward to next week. We'll do our best of, and then I'll come back with an album for the following week. So it should be a lot of fun, and here's to a fruitful and productive 2023.
Yes, I am almost ready to unleash this list onto the world, and I I'm sure I'm not going to be happy with it at the end, but you know what? It is what it is. I can't put it off any longer before I have to start listening to songs from 2023. So I have Beyond the Black on Friday is my first 2023 release that I'm planning on listening to, and so I'm thinking that'll be my cutoff point for 2022, and start getting myself ready for next year's list.
No better time than the present. Enjoy the week, my friend. I will talk to you soon.
All right, have a good one.